Hello and welcome to our 8th session, and in this session we are going to explore the property section of Blender. So coming into Blender, we are going to deal with this property section or this property component. So if you click over here, the properties component comes in the data section. Okay, so now with this property section selected, you have various tabs here. If you just go through it, you have 14 tabs here. The very first tab here is the tool tab. So when I click on this tool tab is going to change depending upon the tool that I am going to select here. Say for example, now the tool I am using is select box, and when I am using select box, you have various options here. This is to create a new selection, and this will add it to the selection. So means, say for example, I add a box like this, so whatever is there inside this box gets selected. Now if I enable this option, now this is selected, then again if I draw a box here, this gets selected. So wherever I draw the box, it gets added. So these kind of options are present here. I will come back to this mode of setting the new selection here. This tool, say for example, if I come and select cursor, you can see the options will change. You have orientation and view, transform, geometry. We will come to these things later, and you have surface project. So all these options we are going to discuss it later. And if I come to move tool, now in every tool you are seeing one options here. So if I open the options in transform, you have three options: affects only origin, affects only location, and affects only parents. This is present both in this tool and even in your 3D viewport. On the right hand corner you have these options and you have these three options. Now say for example, origin means, in this case, say I select this cube. This is the cube that has been selected. Now I will press 1 on numpad and come into the front view. Now say for example, if I press R and if I rotate it, see the cube is rotating along the center of it. I will right click and cancel it. Now instead of rotating it around this point, I want this to rotate around this point. Then I can come to the options here and click on affect only origins. And when I enable this, now if I take the move tool and if I move it like this, you can now see the object is not moving, only the origin point is moving. So I will bring the origin point over here, and now I will come back to option and I will switch it off. Now if I select this and if I take the rotate tool, keyboard shortcut is R, and if I now rotate it, you can now see this is rotating along this axis. So I will press Ctrl Z and I will undo it. Okay, now apart from this, you have another option over here which is called as affect only location. So when you enable this, now what happens is, say I take scale and if I try to scale this cube, see nothing happens. If I try to rotate it, you cannot rotate it. So the rotate and scale is locked and only you can move the object. Okay, so I will again come to edit, undo or press Ctrl Z, and I will come to option and I will switch it off. And the third option I have here is the parents. Now parents means, say for example, there are two objects. I will come to add mesh and I am going to add another object. Say for example, I will add a cylinder and I will press G and I will press Z so that it moves along the Z axis. I will move it and place it here. So this is using keyboard shortcut, we are moving it. Now whenever I can select first the cylinder, then press shift and select the cube. Now cube is the active element. So if you come to the outliner here, you can see here cube is in light orange color. This means that this is the active element and this will be the parent. Now if I come to object, and in object you have an option parent, and if I choose parent object, now what happened is these two are now parented. So now I will click somewhere, deselect everything, and I select only the cube. And now if I rotate this cube, now when I am rotating this cube, see, you can see both are getting rotated. However, I will right click or I will press Ctrl Z and undo, and after I undo, if I select only the cylinder and if I rotate it, you can see only the cylinder is rotated because this is the child. Now I will again go press Ctrl Z and undo. So what if I want to change only this cube and not this cylinder? Then I can come to option, and if I enable parent, and now if I make any modification, say for example, I will now select this cube, take the move tool, and if I move it, you can now see the cylinder is not moving. I can just move it and place it here like this, and now I will come back to option, and if I switch off this parent, I can do it either in option here or in the toolbox here. Okay, and now if I select this and if I press G and move around, both are going to move. So these are the three options that you normally see in all the transformation tools. Actually, this tool panel will have lot of tools when you actually come into the sculpting mode. Say for example, I will come here in object mode and I will change to sculpt mode, and in sculpt mode you have so many tools here, and as I keep changing the selection of my tool here, you can see the options keep changing here. So this has a lot of options available. So I will again now come back here to the object mode. Now the next tab here is the render tab. Now when I click on this render tab now, here is what the image is finally rendered for delivery. And here in Blender, basically there are two render engines. One is called as the Eevee render engine, which is real time, and another is the cycles render engine. Now when I select the Eevee, and if I come to render and choose render image, you can see the object is immediately rendered. So I will close this render window. So if required, it is somewhere outside, I will select this cube, I will come over here, and in transform I will set this value to 0 so that it is in the camera view. Now instead of rendering it using Eevee, if I use cycles, then if I again come to render and render image, but in case of cycles it takes more time to render. After selecting this render engine, you have feature set which you can use either supported or experimental, and the most important thing here is which device you are going to use to render. So if you use CPU, it will take a lot of time to render. However, if you have a graphic card, you can change it to GPU, and this option will be available. I will come to this later. In preferences we have to set this. In preferences I will show you this. So these are the options I have in the render engine. Then you have sampling. We are going to understand how this sampling works, what is this sample strength. So the more the number, the better will be the quality of the image, but it will take lot of time to render if you have 1024 sample. And if I reduce the sample, you will have more noise in your rendered image. So if you have noise, you have an option here to denoise it. So digitally denoise it. There are two options here. One, how the image is rendered in the viewport when you are working, and how the image is rendered when you click on this render option. So you have two options here. In viewport we are not enabling denoise, but only in render you can enable the denoise. And denoise means even if you render it with lesser samples, you still can get a good image by denoising it. So these options we will explore it later. Then you have path guiding, then you have a lot of options available under light, you have advanced options in light. So these things are all available in cycles. Then you have light paths, you can set the light paths, and then you have the volume, curve, simplify, motion blur, and if you open film, you can see the pixel filter. This Blackman-Harris gives the best result. You have boxed, Gaussian and Blackman-Harris. So these things, let us discuss it later. And you have one option here, transparent. Means if you are using your 3D graphic as a PNG image in your graphic design program like Photoshop or in After Effects, if you want the background to be transparent, you can enable this option transparent here. And then you have performance, you have bake, grease pencil, freestyle and color management. All this we will discuss it later. The next option we have here is the output option. So when I click on the output option, here you can set the size of the image that you want to render. Say for example, if you click on this menu thumbnail here, see you have various options, ready-made options available here. HDTV 1080p, if I select, you can automatically see the size is set to 1920 into 1080 and aspect ratio is set to 1:1. Okay. Now the next thing is in frame rate. If you are using it for cinema, we use 24 frames per second. In NTSC, we use 30 frame or 29.97. In PAL, we use 25 frames per second, and this you can set it manually here. And then you have the frame range. So from which frame to which frame I have to render. This is in case of an animation, you can render the animation over here. Now the next is time stretching, and then finally you have stereoscopy, means you can convert your image or the rendering in Blender into a 3D. So for that I can click on stereoscopy, and if you click on it, so every frame 2 images will be rendered. One for the left eye, one for the right eye. So you can save it with the suffix _L and suffix _R, and the stereoscopy settings are available here. I can switch it off, and the other most important thing is the output. So when you render your animation or image, where should it save? So I can click on the folder icon here, and I can select a particular folder and I can ask it to render in that folder. So I can set the path, and after this save file extension, and finally you have the file format, in which format you want to render the image. If I click on this, you want PNG or you want JPEG or you want this to be a video, so FMPEG video. So you have various options available here, and if you want a transparent image, we will set it to PNG, and see that in color it is set to RGBA alpha. Then if you just scroll down, you have color management, and you can also add metadata. Metadata means it is the information about your scene, who has done the 3D. Just like when you take a photograph, you have the metadata. Whatever you render the scene, that metadata will be recorded here. And finally you have the post processing, and we are going to come to these things later. So all these options are available under this output option. The fourth tab is the view layer tab, and in this view layer tab, this will be mostly useful when you are compositing your images using the compositor. There it will, just like in Photoshop you use different layers, in Blender also you can render different scenes in different layers, and you can composite it one another. So for this purpose we use this view layer, and say for example, these options that are available in this view layer depends upon what render output engine you are using. So if I come back to render tab, and if I change it to Eevee, and if I click on view layer, so the number of options will be less compared to if I see, for example, you doesn't have denoise data as of now. So if I come back here to render, and if I choose cycles, only then in layer you can see this denoise data on. So you have more options available in cycles render in this layer tab. And after the layer tab, the next tab you are seeing here is the scene tab. So in the scene tab, so which image has to be rendered. So if you are using multiple camera, you can choose which camera image has to be rendered here, and you can change the background scene. You can add a background scene, you can add an active clip for the background. So these things I can set it in the scene. And the most important thing in the scene is the units. And in units, right now, every 1 unit of Blender here is equal to 1 meter. So say if you are working on a miniature object, then you can set this length, every 1 unit equal to millimeter. I can make every 1 unit of Blender equal to 1 millimeter. Or I can make, if you are building a city, then every 1 unit of your Blender I can change it to kilometer here. By default, this will be set to meters. So if you want to set this in feet, in unit system you can come here and choose imperial, and you can now set the length in feet, miles and inches. So by default, this will be set to metric, and in length it will be set to meters, in rotation it will be set to degrees, and mass will be set in kilograms, and times in seconds, and temperature either in Kelvin and Celsius. You can choose. I have chosen Kelvin. Okay, these are the units that you can set in the scene tab. And apart from units, another most important feature is enabling the gravity, and this will be useful when you are going to use physics. But right now we are not using physics, so this has no effect. By default, this gravity will be enabled, and I can also set the value of gravity. See, the gravity works not left and right, it only works for the movement of up to down. So only in Z the value is set here. The gravitational force of Earth is set here. And after this, next you have simulation. You can set the simulation range here, and then you have the keying sets, you can add it. Then for audio you have various options here, and then you have rigid body world, and you can add custom properties here through a Python script. So all these features are available in this scene tab. And after the scene tab, the next tab is the world tab. World tab means it is the ambient location that you are seeing all around. Say for example, in the default setting, if I come to render and if I render this image, you can see that this image is rendered with a gray color background, and you are seeing some amount of light in the shadow area. However, if I close this, it is still rendering because it is in cycles view. That's why it takes some time to close. So I will come back to render here, and I will change it back to Eevee. Now I will come back to world here, and if I change the color here to pitch black, if I make it fully black, and if I render it, now you can see that the shadow area is totally dark and there is no ambient light. And I will again close this, and I can even change this color. Say for example, I can increase this white area here, and I can make this slightly bluish, and if I render this image will be rendered with a bluish ambient light. So I will again close this. So these are the options available. So I will set this color back to dark gray here, and I will leave this option as it is. So you have these options, then you have volume, you have mist pass, you have settings. We are going to come into this option, viewport display, and all these things we are going to work on it as we work on the project. So this is about setting up your world properties. That is, how is the ambience in your scene around your object. This we will set it in the world property. And then the next option we have is the collection. So when you create collections, say for example, right now I have only one collection. So the different properties of these collections can be set over here. And again here these things we are going to discuss it in later. And then the next tab we have is the object property. And in the object property, in this list, I can select any of the object in my scene. So if I click here, I have three objects. One is the camera. You can set the location, rotation, scale of this camera. Then you have the cube. Then you have the cylinder. So this window you are seeing on the right hand side, and these values will be the same. And apart from this, you have relation, collection, interlacing, motion path, visibility. So you have a lot of options available under this object tab. So we are going to discuss about this again later. So after this you have modifiers. So modifiers are like applying a filter in Photoshop or applying a plugin in After Effects. And also we call this as non-destructive process of modeling. We are going to discuss about this later. Say for example, I select this cube and I will come to add modifier, and you have various modifier, and in generate if I come to array, see I can create multiple copies of this cube. So and in X if I move it slightly away, I have two copies and I can duplicate it and increase the number of copies here. Okay, and if required, I can delete it. So like this, you have various modifiers that you can apply here, and these modifiers, there will be a separate class where we will discuss about this. This is a very big chapter which we will discuss later, and geometry nodes is also a modifier which we are going to come into that later. And basically understand, modifiers helps you to construct your modeling process using a non-destructive way. And what is this non-destructive way and destructive modeling and non-destructive modeling? I am going to explain it later. So we will have a separate class on that. Then you have the next is the particle system. So in this particle system, say for example, I have selected this cube, and if I just click plus and if I add a particle system and if I play it, you can see some particles falling down. Now it is falling down because I have enabled gravity. So now if I stop this, I will rewind it back, and if I come over here to the scene tab and if I switch off gravity, and now if I play it, see it is not falling down but it is moving in all directions. So we can add particles like this. I will stop this and I will rewind it. So these kind of particles are available here. So right now I will select this particle and I will click on minus here to delete it. Then your next option you have is the physics. Physics is the place where you can simulate the real physics laws. So all the Newton's laws of motions can be applied in this scene. Say for example, in this scene, right now I will select this cube and I will delete it. I will select this cylinder, I will delete it. I will come to add mesh and I will add a plane. Press S and I will scale it a little. Then I will come to add mesh and I am going to add a UV sphere. I will press 1 and come in the front view and I will move this UV sphere to the top. With middle mouse I will tilt it. So in a real world, when you have an object like this and when you play the animation, the ball cannot stand like this. It should fall down. So right now it is not falling down because we have not applied any physics to it. So I will stop the playback, then I will rewind, and now say for example, first I will select this plane and I will apply the rigid body physics, and I will set its value to passive because it is the ground. Then I will select this sphere, I will add rigid body and I will set it to active. I can also set its weight. Then automatically, according to the Newton's laws of motion, if I play it, you can, one second, I forgot to come back to scene and I have to enable gravity. If I enable gravity now and if I play it, see the ball falls down. And now say for example here I come and I will slightly rotate and tilt this plane, and if I again move back to the first frame, and now if I play the animation, you can see the ball falls and just rolls in the direction where it is tilted. So like this we can add real-time physics by using this physics tab. So we are going to come to this later and we are going to work on this in detail. So after physics, the next tab you have is the constraint. So we can add object constraint. So I will rewind this, I will come to the first frame, I will select this cube, I will come to physics and I will remove rigid body, I will select the plane and I will remove the rigid body, and now I will select this object, and in this object, say for example I will come over here in object constraint and I am going to add a constraint to this. So you have different constraints here. If I click on limit scale and if I enable the scale along Z, if I enable minimum and maximum, now you can see when I press the scale, I cannot scale this along Z value at all. So or I can set a minimum value of 0.5 to and a maximum value of 1.5. So now when I just scale this, only within these two values I can scale along the x-axis. So like this we can add constraint to our object. So for this we use this object constraint. Right now I will delete it. Then after this you have the mesh data. This is very important, which we are going to discuss it later. So if I come to this mesh data, the most important thing we use here is we create vertex groups, we create shape keys. Say for example in a character, if the mouth or the lips has to move, we add shape keys only for the lips and we are going to create the animation. So these things we will have a detailed discussion later. Then you have UV maps. This is very important and I am going to discuss about this later. Then you have color attributes, attribute, texture space, remesh, geometry data, custom property. All this are present in this data. Say for example here when I select this, if you come into collection, you have sphere. Sphere is just a container, and if I open this sphere, inside this is the object data. So it has the object data sphere. See for example if I select sphere, and now in this object data if I change this to plane, although the name is sphere, this became a plane. So this data of the object that you are using here is controlled using this data tab. Then the next tab we have is the material tab. So in the previous session I had showed you how to create a material and we added a texture. So this material tab we are going to again discuss in detail later. And finally you have the texture tab. So you can create new textures here and you can paint on it using brush. You can mask the texture using brush mask. So all these options are available. So we have this 14 tabs here. See, you are now understanding the in-depth how many features the blenders have, and we have to explore these things one by one, and we are going to do it by working on some real-time project. So this is about the properties window, and now in our first chapter, getting to know the work area, in this the last one that we are going to discuss is about the user preferences, and that we are going to discuss it in our next session. Thank you.